Sophia was 15 years old when the man living in her home, the man her mother trusted with their lives, destroyed her in a way she would carry for years. She did not scream. She did not run. She sat on the floor of her bedroom with her back pressed against the locked door, her knees pulled tight to her chest, staring at the wall in front of her. Because there was nobody to run to. Her mother was at work. The apartment was quiet, and the man who had just taken everything from her was still on the other side of that door, moving around the kitchen like nothing had happened. Like she was nothing. This is her story. It is painful. It is real. And every single word of it matters. If you are new here, welcome. This channel is a home for stories that need to be told. Stories about real pain, real survival, and real strength. Hit the subscribe button so you never miss one. And stay with me, because what Sophia does with this pain will change the way you see the world. Sophia was not the kind of girl who asked for much. She was 15 years old, tall, quietly serious, with dark brown eyes that always seemed to be turning something over behind them. She was not the loudest in her school, not the most popular. She did not have the newest clothes or the most friends or any of the things that seemed to matter so much at that age. But she had a dream. And she held onto it the way people hold onto the one thing they cannot afford to lose. She wanted to be a lawyer, not for the title, not for the money, but because from a very young age Sophia had watched people around her get crushed by things that were not their fault. She had watched families fall apart under the weight of systems they did not understand. She had watched good people lose to bad situations simply because nobody was in their corner. She wanted to be in people's corners. Every night at the small wooden desk pushed against the wall of her tiny bedroom she studied, while the neighbors argued through the thin walls, while the city rattled outside her window, while everything around her was loud and uncertain and exhausting. She sat under her lamp and she studied, because the dream was the one thing in her life that was fully, completely, untouchably hers. Her mother, Carmen, was a good woman. Warm, loving, hard-working in the way that people who have no other choice are hard-working, not because they want to but because stopping is not an option. Sophia's parents had separated when she was 12, and Carmen had responded the only way she knew how, by working. Early mornings, late nights, double shifts, whenever she could get them. She was holding the family together with both hands and sheer determination, and the stubborn love of a mother who refused to let her daughter's life fall apart. Sophia understood that. She was 15, not 5. She understood what survival looked like. But understanding something and not being hurt by it are two very different things. The apartment that had once held her whole family now felt like a place where the air had been let out. Too quiet, too still, full of furniture that remembered louder days. Sophia's father had been a warm presence in her early life. She still remembered him at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, coffee in hand, teasing her mother until both of them were laughing. But he was gone now, and he had stayed gone. No calls to check on his daughter, no visits, no letters, just a silence that told Sophia everything she needed to know about how much she had mattered to him when things got hard. She had stopped waiting for him to show up a long time ago. She told herself the dream was enough. For a while it was. Marco arrived on a Thursday evening. Sophia had been at her desk studying when she heard the key in the lock, followed by 2 sets of footsteps instead of one. She walked out of her room to find her mother standing in the doorway with a man beside her, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed neatly, with an easy smile that arrived on his face the moment he saw Sophia, like he had been practicing it. "This is Marco," Carmen said. There was something careful and fragile in her voice, something that was trying very hard to be hope. He reached out his hand. Firm handshake. Direct eye contact. "Great to meet you, Sophia. Your mother talks about you all the time." He seemed solid, put together, the kind of man who fills a room without raising his voice. But more than anything, he made Carmen smile. And Carmen's smile had been absent for so long that seeing it return even cautiously, even tentatively, made Sophia's chest ache in a complicated way. She shook his hand. She gave him a polite smile. And she told herself that if this man made her mother feel less alone, she would make peace with his presence. She had no idea what she was agreeing to. Marco knew exactly how to be patient. That is what made him dangerous. Not rage, not obvious cruelty, but patience. The slow, deliberate, calculated patience of someone who understands that rushing makes people suspicious. He helped around the apartment without being asked. He fixed the leaking tap in the bathroom. He sat at the dinner table and made conversation. He was present in all the right ways. Carmen exhaled for the first time in years. She slept better. She laughed more. She came home from shifts looking lighter instead of flattened. And Sophia watched all of it. Because even as Marco was being everything Carmen needed him to be, Sophia's body was sending her signals she did not have words for yet. A tightening in her chest when he entered a room. An instinct to cross her arms over herself when he passed too close. A subtle wrongness that lived in her gut and refused to be reasoned away no matter how many times she told herself she was imagining things. She was not imagining things. Then one evening Sophia came home from school to find Marco sitting at the kitchen table going through her school bag. She stopped in the doorway. He looked up without any guilt on his face whatsoever. Not a flicker of embarrassment. Not even the courtesy of a reasonable explanation. He just looked at her, calm, steady, deliberate, and said he was checking that she had everything she needed for her studies. Then he smiled. Sophia walked over and took her bag from the table without a word. She went to her room and locked the door and sat on her bed and tried to understand why her hands were shaking. It was not the act itself. It was the smile, the complete absence of shame in it. The way he had looked at her, like he already knew she would not say anything. Like he had already calculated exactly how much he could get away with. That was the moment Sophia understood that something in this man was deeply and deliberately wrong. The warning signs escalated after that. Late-night phone calls in hushed tones that stopped the moment she appeared in the hallway. Strange men arriving at odd hours. Hard-faced quiet going into the back room with Marco and leaving 20 minutes later without making eye contact with anyone. Carmen worked nights and never saw them. Sophia saw them every time. Then came the smell. Sharp, chemical, wrong in a way that crept under her bedroom door and settled in the back of her throat. Sophia knew exactly what that smell meant. Marco had a drug problem. A serious, consuming, destructive one. The kind that hollows a person out and leaves something dangerous in the empty space. And as the drugs took more of him, the way he watched Sophia changed in a way that made her feel like the walls of the apartment were closing in. She started locking her bedroom door at night. She told herself she was being paranoid. Her body knew better. It was a Wednesday. Sophia had stayed home from school with a headache, the kind that comes not from sickness, but from weeks of tension from a body that has been bracing itself for something it cannot quite name and is exhausting itself in the waiting. Carmen had left for her shift at 6 in the morning. The apartment was quiet. Marco was supposed to be out. He was not out. Sophia was in the kitchen making tea when she heard his bedroom door open. She did not turn around. She focused on the kettle, on the steam, on the sound of water beginning to boil. She told herself to stay calm, to pour her tea and walk back to her room and lock the door and wait until he left. She never made it to her room. What Marco did that afternoon was not impulsive. It was not a moment of weakness or confusion or something that could be excused by the drugs or the circumstances or anything else. It was deliberate, calculated. The act of a man who had been watching and waiting and had decided that he could. He violated her, completely, in the home that was supposed to be her safe place on a Wednesday morning while her mother was at work and the kettle was still boiling in the kitchen. He took something from Sophia that she had not offered, something that was hers and only hers, something no human being has the right to take from another regardless of who they are or what power they think they have. When it was over, when she was finally alone, Sophia slid down the wall of her bedroom until she was sitting on the floor, back against the locked door, knees to her chest, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her own body together because nothing else was holding it. She sat there for a very long time. She did not cry at first. She was too shattered for tears. She sat in the terrible silence of the apartment and listened to Marco moving around on the other side of the door, making coffee, turning on the television, living his life, as though nothing had happened. as though what he had just done was nothing, as though she was nothing. And that complete and total indifference, that casualness, broke something in her that the act itself had not finished breaking. When the tears came, they were the silent kind, the kind that pour down your face while you make no sound at all, because somewhere deep in your mind you are still terrified of being heard, still terrified of giving him even that. She sat there until she could breathe again. Then she thought about telling her mother. She pictured Carmen's face, the relief that had slowly returned to it, the way she had started sleeping again, started smiling again, started looking like a woman who believed things might actually be okay. How could Sophia take that from her? And beneath that fear was something darker and more suffocating, shame. A deep crawling shame that had no right to exist inside her body, but existed there anyway. The kind of shame that whispers terrible lies to survivors in the silence after. That tells them they should have fought harder, should have screamed louder, should have seen it coming, should have done something, anything differently. Sophia pressed her hands flat against the floor. She knew, somewhere beneath the shame she knew, that none of this was her fault, that the shame living in her body did not belong to her, that it belonged entirely to the man on the other side of that door. But knowing something and feeling it are two different things entirely. And in that moment, on that floor, the shame was louder than the knowing. So she made the decision that would cost her everything for months to come. She stayed silent. She wiped her face. She stood up. She unlocked her door. And she walked back to her desk and opened her textbook as though the world had not just ended. But it had. Quietly. Invisibly. Completely. It had. Silence is not peaceful when it is forced upon you. It is a cage. And Sophia lived inside it every single day. In the weeks that followed, she watched herself disappear. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone around her could easily point to and name. Just slowly, steadily, the way a fire goes out when there is no more oxygen. The girl who had attacked her textbooks with hunger and purpose now sat at her desk and stared at pages that meant absolutely nothing. The words blurred. The sentences ran together. The dream of standing in a courtroom felt like it belonged to someone else now. Some other girl who had not had everything carved out of her on a Wednesday morning. She stopped eating properly. A few bites at dinner to avoid questions. Nothing more. Food had lost all taste entirely. Her body was present at the table, but the rest of her was somewhere far away, still sitting on that floor, still listening to Marco make coffee on the other side of the door. She stopped sleeping. When sleep came, it dragged her into nightmares, vivid, relentless, inescapable, that left her gasping in the dark with her heart slamming against her ribs. She would lie there until morning came, too afraid to close her eyes again. She flinched at sounds. A door slamming. Footsteps approaching too quickly. A voice raised suddenly in another room. Her body had learned the language of fear completely and spoke it fluently now, whether she wanted it to or not. At school, she became a ghost. She sat in classrooms without being in them. She answered when her name was called. She did just enough to avoid drawing attention. She found empty stairwells and quiet corners where she could breathe without anyone watching her face and seeing what was written there. Carmen noticed Sophia was quieter, more withdrawn. She asked once if everything was okay. Marco answered before Sophia could. "She's just being a teenager," he said easily with that same practice smile. "You know how they are." Carmen nodded. She was exhausted. She needed things to be okay. And Sophia sat across from the man who had violated her, watching her mother accept his explanation, and felt a bitterness rise in her chest so hot and so total that she had to look down at her plate to hide her face. She wanted to stand up. She wanted to point across that table and say the truth out loud in the middle of that ordinary dinner and watch his easy smile finally collapse. She wanted her mother to see him, really see him, but the shame held her down, and the fear of not being believed held her down, and the exhaustion of carrying something this heavy for this long held her down. So she looked at her plate and she said nothing, and Marco smiled and poured himself more water. She tried once to reclaim something of herself. She opened her old law textbook, the one she had been so excited to buy, the one with her own handwritten notes in the margins, and she forced herself to read. One paragraph, then another. She got 3 pages in before her eyes blurred and her hands began to shake, and she had to close it and push it away. She put her head down on the desk. She thought about her father, about how he had simply disappeared when things got hard, about how not one person, not her father, not the neighbors, not any adult in her life, had noticed what was happening to her inside that apartment, about how completely invisible her pain was to the world around her. The loneliness of that was staggering. But even at the very bottom of the darkest place she had ever been, something in Sophia refused to fully let go. Something quiet and hard that sat in the deepest part of her and said simply, "Not like this. You do not end like this." She did not know yet how she was going to survive, but she knew she was going to. Then one afternoon, a hand touched her shoulder gently in the school corridor. She spun around fast, her whole body reacting before her mind could, and found herself face to face with Miss Reyes, her literature teacher, a small, sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, who had been in enough classrooms to recognize the difference between a student going through a rough patch and a student being swallowed alive by something no one around her can see. "Sophia," she said quietly, "come with me." She led her to an empty classroom and closed the door. She did not sit behind the desk the way teachers do when they are about to lecture you. She pulled a chair directly in front of Sophia and sat close enough that Sophia could see that the concern on her face was not professional or polished. It was the raw, unguarded concern of a woman looking at a young person in serious pain and refusing to look away from it. "Tell me what is happening," Miss Reyes said. "And please, do not tell me you are fine." Sophia's mouth opened. The word fine was right there, rehearsed, hollow, ready. But her body had been carrying this alone for so long. And Miss Reyes was looking at her with eyes that said, "I already know something is terribly wrong, and I am not leaving this room until I understand what it is." Something cracked open in Sophia's chest. She started to cry, not the silent, disciplined kind she had perfected over weeks, the raw kind, the kind that shakes your whole body and makes your throat ache and empties you out completely. And when she finally found her voice, broken barely above a whisper, she told Miss Reyes the truth. All of it. Every dark and shameful and terrifying piece of it. Miss Reyes did not flinch, did not shift uncomfortably, did not look at Sophia like she was a problem or a burden or something too complicated to deal with. She sat completely still and she listened, with everything she had, until Sophia was done. Then she leaned forward and took both of Sophia's hands in hers. "What happened to you was not your fault," she said clearly and quietly, and with a kind of certainty that leaves no room for argument. "Not one single part of it. The shame you are carrying does not belong to you. It never did. And you are not alone anymore. Do you hear me? Not anymore." Sophia pressed her lips together hard. And for the first time since that Wednesday morning, she believed that she might actually survive this. Everything moved quickly after that. Miss Reyes reported what Sophia had disclosed. Authorities were contacted. An investigation opened. When officers searched the apartment, they found the drugs, significant quantities that stacked the case heavily against Marco. He was arrested within days. Carmen came home to a world she did not recognize. When the investigators sat across from her and explained what had been happening, what Marco had done, how long it had been going on, how completely it had occurred beneath her own roof, Carmen went very still. She sat in the chair and stared at the table and went somewhere inside herself, so quiet and so dark that the officers exchanged a glance over her head. Then she looked up and asked to see her daughter. When Sophia walked into the room, Carmen crossed the floor in 3 steps and pulled her into her arms so fiercely, so completely, that Sophia felt something she had not felt in months. "Safe. I am so sorry," Carmen said into her hair. Over and over. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry." She said it like if she said it enough times it would reach back through time and fix everything. Every missed sign, every long shift, every evening she had come home too exhausted to really look at her daughter's face. It could not, and Carmen knew it. The weeks that followed were brutal. Carmen stopped functioning. She sat in the dark apartment for hours, replaying every moment, every choice, every time she had believed Marco's easy reassurances over her own daughter's quiet withdrawal. The guilt consumed her completely. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped going to work. She had chosen to trust the wrong man, and her child had paid a price that could never be fully repaid, and there was nothing she could do to take it back. Sophia watched her mother disappear into that guilt. And one evening she sat beside her in the dark and reached over and took her hand. "Mama," she said, "I need you to hear me. I do not blame you. I know you did not know. And I know that if you had known, you would have burned everything down to protect me. But I need you to come back now, because I cannot heal while I am watching you destroy yourself. I need my mother. Please come back to me." Carmen looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she closed her eyes and nodded, and something in her face shifted, not completely, not all at once, but enough. Like a woman who has been underwater deciding to swim. She went back to work the following week. She booked them both into therapy, and slowly, painfully, imperfectly, stubbornly, they began the long work of healing together. The therapy was hard in ways Sophia had not anticipated. There were sessions that left her feeling scraped, open, and raw. There were nights consumed by rage, hot, total, suffocating rage at Marco, at the silence, at the shame that had held her hostage, at a world that allowed men like him to exist and destroy and walk through life, taking what they wanted from people who trusted them. She felt every piece of it. She did not push it away. Her therapist told her the rage was not something to be afraid of, that the rage meant she knew she deserved better, that the rage was proof she had never fully believed the lie that she was nothing. She held on to that. And 4 months after everything had broken open, Sophia sat down at her desk one evening and opened her law textbook. She read one page, then another, then a chapter, then more. The words came back slowly, like feeling returning to a limb that had been numb for too long. She sat under her lamp, and she read until her mother knocked softly on the door and told her it was late. She put her hand flat on the open page, and she made herself a promise she intended to keep for the rest of her life. Sophia was 18 when she walked into law school for the first time. She sat in that first lecture hall and felt something settle in her chest. A quiet certainty. A sense of arriving exactly where she was always supposed to be. 5 years of the hardest, most purpose-driven work of her life. She was not just studying for a degree. She was studying for every girl who had ever sat on a cold floor with her back against a locked door and no one to call. She was going to be the person in their corner. She was going to be the voice in the room that changed things. She graduated at 23. She passed the bar exam at 24. When the results came through, she sat alone in her car for a long time. She pressed her hand flat against the folder and felt the full, impossible weight of the distance between the girl on the bedroom floor and the woman sitting here now. Then she called her mother. Carmen answered on the first ring. "I passed, Mama." The sound Carmen made was not a word. It was something older and deeper than words. It was the sound of a mother who had walked through fire with her daughter and come out the other side, and was now watching that daughter become everything she was always meant to be. That same evening, Sophia sat down and wrote a long handwritten letter. She had been composing it in her head for years, adding to it, revising it, carrying it around like something precious. She wrote slowly and carefully, saying everything that needed to be said. She sealed it and wrote a name on the front, Miss Reyes. The letter ended with 3 words that could never be enough, but were the most true thing she had ever written. "You saved me." Sophia was 26 years old the first time she stood up in a courtroom as a lawyer. The case involved a 14-year-old girl, quiet, withdrawn, with eyes that held a heaviness no child's eyes should ever hold. A girl who had been let down by the people who were supposed to protect her, and was now sitting inside a cold, complicated system that felt nothing like justice. Sophia looked across the room at that girl, and she saw herself, completely and fully, and without any distance between then and now, herself. She straightened her jacket. She gathered her files. She walked forward until she was standing before the judge. She felt the weight of every eye in the room. She let herself feel the full weight of the moment. The bedroom floor, the lamp on the desk, the silence, the shame, the rage, the letter to Miss Reyes, her mother's voice on the phone. All of it. She carried all of it forward with her. And she opened her mouth. Your Honor, my client is not here to be pitted. She is not here to be processed or managed or filed away. She is here because she was wronged by someone who was supposed to protect her. She is here because she deserves justice. And I intend to stand in this courtroom for as long as it takes to make sure she receives exactly that. The room was silent. Across the courtroom, the 14-year-old girl slowly looked up. And for the first time in what had clearly been a very long time, she did not look alone. Some wounds do not disappear. Some things that are taken from you cannot be fully given back. The girl on the floor of that bedroom, the girl carrying the shame that was never hers, the girl eating in silence across from the man who destroyed her. That girl does not simply vanish when the healing begins. She stays. She becomes part of you. But some people like Sophia, refuse to let that girl be the last word. They take the pain and the bitterness and the burning rage and the long, devastating silence, and they build something out of it that the person who hurt them never intended and could never have imagined. They become the voice in the room that the voiceless have been waiting for their entire lives. If there is a child near you right now, a child who has gone quiet, who flinches at sounds, who has disappeared behind their eyes, please stop everything. Ask them how they are really doing. Then be still and wait. And listen. Not just hear them. Truly listen. Because the children who suffer in silence are not silent because they have nothing to say. They are silent because they are waiting, desperately waiting, for one person with enough courage to truly ask. Be that person. Every child deserves to be safe. Every child deserves to be heard. Every child deserves the chance to become everything they were always meant to be. Sophia did. And so do they. If this story moved something in you, share it. Put it in front of someone who needs it today. You never know whose life you might change simply by passing it on. And if you are not yet part of this family, subscribe. Because every week we bring you stories like Sophia's. Stories of real pain, real survival, and real human strength that will remind you what people are truly capable of when they refuse to give up. We will see you in the next one.